Hello and welcome to the Screen Chronicles. I'm Colby.
And I'm Steve.
And we have a very special addition to our podcast today as we're joined by a special guest. Now, if you're watching our podcast or listening to it, you probably know him from The Last Kingdom, and you might say that he is the true king. We're joined today by Harry McEntire, who portrays Æthelwold on The Last Kingdom. And thank you, Harry, for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on. It's lovely.
So, like we said before the episode, we really got into The Last Kingdom when we were in PT school.
Yeah.
And we got into being big fans. We thought everyone killed it in the show, especially you too, because you're pretty fun and interesting the first two seasons. And in season 3, you take a big, dark turn and start making some moves to get that crown.
It was really lucky actually, because I think, quite a lot of times when you read scripts, you're fulfilling a really definite role in the narrative, and in terms of where the story's going, you can kind of predict that arc and you can chart it, and you can be like, oh, well, A will follow B will follow C, and this is kind of where he's going to end up. And I think with Æthelwold, where I was really, really lucky is that there was some kind of really unusual turns that he took, and the character that I read when I first auditioned, I remember getting the script and saying to my girlfriend, oh, he could be really exciting. This if this keeps going and we get enough seasons out of it, because after I got the job, I read the books, and so I had a sense of where it was going to go and hopefully where it was going to finish. I was like, if we get there, he's going to have some really, really exciting stuff to do. And I think there are kind of tropes that exist in historical drama, and you either have you can often find yourself playing not me, but people can find themselves playing big muscly guys who stand there and look scary and crack some skulls and get to do a lot of battle scenes. And then you can get a lot of characters who stand behind the king and who do a little bit of weaseling and do a little bit of politicking. And then you get some kind of light relief characters. And I think Æthelwold kind of managed to do a bit of everything. And that was what was exciting, was that he kind of flitted between these three states and those kind of three archetypes, and kind of found something that I think hopefully was quite unusual. And yeah, it was really gratifying. It was a really lovely thing to do.
Absolutely. You really kind of run the gamut of all the aspects of the show. I mean, you're in Winchester a lot, but you're also, with the Danes. You're also with Uhtred's group. You also have a awesome battle scene in Ethandon, So you really have kind of run the gamut of it all.
Yeah, that happened. That kind of happened when we started series 1, we were given... We never start a series. I don't know what they did in the most recent one, but we never start a series with every script already in our possession. So we'd start with maybe somewhere between 2 and 4 episodes completely written, and others we'd have an awareness of drafts. But the writing of the show is something that happens while we're shooting it, and so we don't kind of know. You have people who you don't necessarily know whether you're going to be in big battles. You don't know whether you're going to survive big battles. They'll tell you in advance if you're going to die. You don't just read it with everybody else. But the Cornwallum, which happens in, I think, episode 6 of season 1, they ended up writing me into that. I don't think in the original outlines Æthelwold was going to be part of that at all. And essentially, you realize that you can kind of pick him up out of that narrative and just put him somewhere else, and it doesn't hugely affect the narrative. But they enjoyed having that third party with Uhtred and with Leofric, which gave it a little bit of a different dimension. So the character kind of grew as the series went on, and as they're writing it, they start to respond to what you're doing as an actor. And I was just fortunate that the role that Æthelwold started to take and the dynamic that he started to exist in was one that they enjoyed and they wanted to see more of. So I was as surprised as anybody. I thought I was going to be pretty isolated in the court, and then you kind of have people going, you need to go and do some more horse riding. You're like, okay, I'm going to do some horse training. I think you're going to be I think you're going raiding in episode 6. Okay, amazing.
Had you ever been on a horse before the show?
No, never. So the horse riding thing was mad. I'd never done anything like it. I come from a family of short men with strong legs, so I've kind of always assumed I could do it with all the confidence of someone who's never really stood near a horse, let alone got on the back of one. And we had a really good horse master who was also the stunt coordinator, who's a guy called Levente Lejac. And he taught, I mean, you'd go kind of 3 or 4 at a time. And it was like, first you just stand with the horse and you'd look at the horse, and he'd teach you how to approach it. And then you'd walk with it, and then you'd get on it and you would be walked while on the back of it, and all this kind of stuff. And I knew I'd like the athletic challenge of it. But what I didn't realize was you'd bond with the horse so much. I don't know if either of you guys have ever ridden.
I've dated a few girls, and I've had some horses. I'm not an expert or anything though.
No, but neither was I. I mean, neither was I at all. But like, it's mad how much you bond with the animal. So and it was a quirk of the story, because in season 1, when Winchester gets taken by the Danes, all the horses get taken by the Danes, but Æthelwold stays in Winchester, so he keeps his horse. So I was the only character who rode the same horse for 3 years.
Wow.
So I had a horse called Matthias, who was my stunt my stunt double's personal horse. And so I rode him for 3 years, and he would recognize me when I came back a year later. He'd kind of come towards me, and I really wanted to have a bond with him, because I think it just made me much more comfortable, because sometimes we got to do a bit of cantering. Like, they didn't really want us to canter. We definitely weren't allowed to gallop. And about once a series, they'd go, no, okay, we probably need it to be you doing this canter. And then kind of me, I remember one particular incident in series 2 where me, Mark, who plays Finan, Arnis, who plays Citric, and Alex, obviously, who plays Uhtred, they were like, okay, you can canter in. And we all looked at each other and we went, let's just go as fast as we can. Because it was the only chance you were going to get to really, really go quick. But the more kind of bonded you are with the animal, I mean, I think it worked for me, the better results you seem to get. But no, it was amazing. The horse riding was amazing.
You can never underestimate an animal. I mean,
totally.
The way they can, project their feelings onto you. I mean, obviously this particular horse remembered you, season to season, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, we wrote each other letters at the end of series 1. The horse, I got him a kilo of carrots and a kilo of apples, and he wrote me a letter, which I think my stunt double didn't speak very good English, and I spoke terrible Hungarian, and so he got someone else to write a letter on behalf of Matthias, the horse, and then got Matthias to step on it.
Oh,
so I had a letter somewhere with this hoof print of this.
That's beautiful.
Horse from series 1. Yeah.
Or are you staying in touch? You stay in touch with the horse or anyone after season 3?
I should have stayed in touch with the horse. No, I mean, like, I'm still in touch with my makeup artist. I had an incredible makeup artist who we all called LJ, because she was called Judith, and there were 2 Judiths, so she was little Judith, so she was LJ. Okay. And she did my makeup for 3 years. And she painted, she's a really brilliant painter, and she painted me a beautiful picture, and we have that hanging up in the house. And I'm still in touch with a lot of the cast and some of the directors and the crew. Like, we were really lucked out. Like, we just had proper good people, and the Hungarian crew that we had were unbelievable. Like, really,
it seems it.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, we just kind of see it from the social media aspect, the behind the scenes. So you never really know, but it just seems like everybody on that cast just seems like a good person. And it seems like you guys really liked each other and had fun doing your jobs. Was it fun on set?
Oh my God, so much fun. It's so much fun. And I mean, we're in the middle of lockdown, like everyone. And, I've had Skype or similar with Tobias, who plays young Ragnar, who's a really very, very good friend of mine, with James Northcote, who plays Aldhelm. In fact, he, I don't think he'll mind me saying this, when he got married, I married him and his wife, and my partner and I are engaged, and he's marrying me and my girlfriend, hopefully this summer. I've been hanging out over video calls with like at least half a dozen members of the cast. There's a lot of them who hopefully will be coming to the wedding and all that kind of stuff. I can't think of anyone across all 3 years who I would cross the street to avoid, or who I wouldn't be pleased to see. We were very, very fortunate. Yeah.
We love to hear that.
Yeah, awesome.
As fans of the show, we love hearing that.
It is funny though when we're watching the show and everyone's plotting against each other and things, and then you see like Eliza Butterworth is like being friends with everyone, and
yeah,
like,
Eliza's she's like a real like she really is like the heart of the cast, and I think that quite a few of us who were in series 1, for a lot of the younger actors, it was the most significant television job we'd ever done. You know, it certainly was for me. It was for Eliza. She wasn't long out of drama school, I don't think. And for David, who played Alfred. And, you know, we were very lucky that the senior members of the cast that we had were people like Simon Kunz, who played Odda, and A.D. Bauer, who played Leia Fritsch, and then some, you know, fantastic European actors like I didn't work with Peter Gansler and Rutger Hauer, but you know, the guys who were in the older generations of Vikings in season 1, Danes, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a kind of top-down real encouragement, and it was a very nurturing environment. And so we took it upon ourselves that obviously at the end of every season, like half the cast killed. And so those of us who were left kind of really made the decision, I think, that we had to keep that spirit in the cast. And so when you meet the majority of people is at the read-through for the beginning of season 2. And so, you know, we would make sure that there was a big WhatsApp group. Everyone would go out for dinner the first night, and people were, you know, every night there were at least half a dozen people who were going out for dinner together or going for drinks together, and we'd meet. There were a few bars that we'd all go to, because you don't really have anything apart from each other when you're over there. You're all a long way from home, and
you're in
Budapest, in Hungary?
Correct.
Yeah, we're in Budapest. Yeah, in Hungary, in Budapest, which is a really beautiful city and a really kind of great place to visit. And unless you've got each other, you can be really, really isolated. And so, yeah, we relied on each other. And I think that when you do that, it kind of fosters this kind of collaborative thing. But also, I mean, a family always sounds incredibly cliched. And it sometimes like does a disservice to people who have actual siblings. But in terms of really, really close friends and people who really care about each other, it's a group of people who are really close friends and really care about each other. And that was the loveliest environment to work in.
That is awesome.
That's
awesome to hear.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we're very interested in learning about what it was like on the set, obviously. Could you walk us through like a normal day shooting The Last Kingdom?
Yeah, man. It would be... Well, my makeup call changed quite a bit, because in season 1 I had a lot of small prosthetics. So I remember the first time we had makeup tests, and I came out from my makeup test, and I called my girlfriend, and I was like, this show, like, everyone's going to look horrific. Like, we've all got boils, we've all got terrible haircuts, like they're making everyone look really shit. And then I got to set the first day I was working, I was like, oh no, it's me that they've done. Because I had we decided that he had some kind of like sexually transmitted disease which had manifested itself in kind of facial boils and sores, and they would get I didn't have much of a beard back then at all, and so I couldn't really grow one. And what they would do is they would stick kind of glue to odd patches of my face and get a wig and just dab bits of wig hair into my face and then cut them at irregular length, so I looked really scruffy. And then in season 2 there was so itchy. And then in season 2 we had there was a little bit of a cleaner look at the beginning because he'd kind of grown up a bit, and then by season 3 I mean, I'm guessing your list. I don't need to worry about spoilers, do I? Because I'm guessing listeners are listening to this. You know, certainly by the time I was having the prosthetic applied over the eye when he has his eye removed, that was about 2 hours to put the eye on. So, I mean, if we take season 3 as an example, it was I'd probably be up if we were starting work. If we were on set at 8:30, I was probably in the car at somewhere between 4:45 and 5:20 in the morning, and then you'd turn up on set. You'd be in the chair in somewhere between kind of from about 6 o'clock for about 2 hours, and then you're into costume, and then normally you'd run through a scene, The director, depending on the director, you would either have it quite sketched out in terms of what they wanted from camera movements and what they wanted from the movements of the actors. And other directors were a little bit wanted more to collaborate on that. And some directors had an idea of how they wanted to shoot it to kind of maximize the impact of the scene. And you'd probably work for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then you'd go off. Most people would, if you needed to have makeups finished or if you needed to have your costume finished. And then you get into like a real fluid thing. Sometimes you might go back to your trailer while they set up lights and you sit for 4 or 5 hours. And sometimes you might get back to your trailer and they immediately say, right, we're ready to shoot. And depending on whether you're on location or whether you're in the studio, because a lot of the interiors, so all of the stuff, all of the Winchester interiors, like the throne room, the interiors of Beb and Burr, the interiors of, I'm trying to remember now because there were so many, the interior of Uhtred's house at Cookham, the interiors of King Peredur in Cornwalham, they're kind of all one set. It has the throne room never changes, so the throne room is always there for Alfred. And then there's a kind of big space at the end. And sometimes that would be where Uhtred lived. Sometimes that was Ragnar's Hall in season 1. And those kind of interiors. So they're a little bit easier to light because they're not going anywhere and you've got an actual roof. Although we were just down the road from, I think, a factory that was making concrete or asphalt or something. And sometimes you would just hear pneumatic drills and trucks for like 4 hours at a time, and the sound department going absolutely insane. But yeah, then dependent on location and dependent on kind of weather and all these kind of stuff, the day gets really fluid. But you normally wrap, if you start at 8, you normally wrap by about 6, and then you have a D rig where they kind of take everything. You know, certainly for me, take the prosthetic off. You know, you get to have a blink for the first time in about 10 hours.
Yeah, I was wondering what that the eye was like to wear. I mean,
you get used to it, but it was really and also I'm really aware of going, it was really hard, and going, yeah, but you're an actor, like you've got a really lovely job. So it wasn't hard.
Wearing something on your face is hard. It's all
yeah,
right.
it was. It was just a faff. Like I'd have it taped shut.
Okay.
So that it wouldn't shift too much. And then they would stick my eyebrows down and powder my eyebrows. And then they'd start to apply this prosthetic. And the prosthetic would be applied tiny section by tiny. It's one piece, but they'd kind of glue an area and then they'd hit it with a hairdryer to make the glue tacky and gradually start to kind of almost brush the glue in and brush the prosthetic over the top of it. And then you go in and you paint. I mean, this is where my LJ, the makeup artist, was so incredible. You know, she'd paint the individual thread veins into the prosthetic and she'd paint the red, you know, because it's kind of neutral color. And so you don't have to build that back to my skin tone. And so, yeah, I mean, when you've had it on for anything up to 6 hours was completely fine. Anything beyond that, it started to get a little bit uncomfortable. I think the longest I had it on was 12. And then it's kind of a bit disorientating because the worst thing is if it's hot, you start to sweat under the prosthetic and then you sweat the tape off your eye. So your eye is open under the prosthetic. So every time you're blinking against the inside of the prosthetic. And that's really uncomfortable.
Imagine. Oh.
I was kind of, yeah. I think it was probably the grumpiest I ever got was doing the big battle at the end of season 3. This the kind of battle where I die essentially, where you know battles are really hard things to shoot. They're really time consuming, and often you'll be called, and then for whatever reason you might not even be used that day, or you might. And I would kind of sit there, having had the prosthetic put on, and then you'd sit there for a good few hours and then they go, look, you know, we're just not going to get to you. And that was probably as tough as it ever got. But as I say, relatively speaking, I don't really have anything to complain about. Although I did complain. I mean, I did complain.
You're allowed to complain.
Well, I think the makeup crew and the lighting crew and certainly the cinematography crew all deserve major props, because one thing Steve and I have always talked about this show is that they go to great lengths to really make it look real. Compared to some of the other medieval time shows that we've seen. The Last Kingdom, like, it doesn't look like it's like lit by lights. It looks like inside a hall it's lit by fire, and it looks like people walking down the street, haven't showered or taken a bath and and however long, and definitely props to them. It's impressive.
I think that when we go back to the very beginning of the show, we all got when we auditioned for it, we got a letter. The first director that we worked with on the show, who did episodes 1 and 2, was also a co-executive producer on the show. He's a director called Nick Murphy, and he has a quite unusual way of shooting, which is the camera should have almost complete freedom to move. So rather than a more traditional way of shooting, which would be, okay, we're looking in a particular direction, so let's move everything behind the camera, because the camera is not going to move from left to right. It's either going to be locked off or it's going to have very, very minimal movement in it. He didn't want that. He wanted everyone out the room, apart from the actors and the camera operator and the boom operator. And so you could just move around. You could move, and it had a real handheld feel to it, because it had to. And it had quite a loose... He had a really kind of free approach to the script. So I remember my first day, the first scene I think I ever shot was a scene in Alfred's throne room, although at that time it was Æthelwold, my father's throne room, before he died. And I'm being told off for being drunk, and I'm saying, I don't know what you expect me to do. I didn't really do anything wrong. I was just sleeping. And he came up to me, Nick, and he said, top of this scene, feel free to improvise and find your way into it. And I thought, I have literally no idea how to do that. I don't know how to improvise in period sax. So I kind of, and let me tell you, none of that improvisation made the cut, because I was stood there kind of thinking, what kind of things should I say? And I was thinking, I am in a period drama. So I think at one point I said, what would you have me do? Which I'm sure I picked up from like Lord of the Rings and every other period drama. Someone says, what would you have me do?
Yeah.
But Last Kingdom isn't really that kind of show. And I was saying about the letter. So when we auditioned, we got this letter that Nick had written, and it was to be sent to every actor who was auditioning for the show to let them know that we are not making a traditional, he said, like, we're going to ban people eating turkey legs. We're not going to have kind of people slapping each other on the thighs and going, rah, ha, ha. He wanted something that felt very character driven and very authentic, and felt, I mean, not like a documentary, because my goodness, we really kind of have very limited knowledge of how they lived, but something that didn't feel like a big plush period drama. And that sensibility, not only in terms of script and performance, but like you guys say, in terms of cinematography, in terms of the makeup and the costume, it wasn't about making it a glamorous kind of sexy world for people to be in. It was kind of grimy and dirty. And I think the thing that I always think is Æthelwold is a perfect example, really. Æthelwold is not an alpha male by any stretch of the imagination, and he's not someone who we look at as being particularly strong or possessed of particular kind of physical attributes, but he is probably tougher than anyone I've ever met in my life, because he was alive. Like, he lived at that time when in the winter you were cold and wet all the time, and they were hard people. And I think it's a hard world, and the show is at its best, I think, when the world looks hard and the people in it are hard.
Absolutely. So I think this is a good time. I have a question for you about the show itself, and Steve and I have kind of debated this.
Okay.
The Last Kingdom, in a way, has a way of almost making it seem like supernatural things happen.
Yeah.
But almost every supernatural thing that happens seems like it could be explained by, something rational explanation.
Yeah.
For example, like when Uhtred needs to save Edward, with Iseult saves Edward, and she tells him, someone's going to die. Uhtred's son ends up dying. You know, obviously at that time period, I'm sure a lot of infants died at that time period anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like you could have a rational explanation, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the same. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. It's a really good question. I think sometimes it comes to when you look at the source material, the books, it's written from the point of view of Uhtred.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything we see has that sense of it being a narrator. Even in the show, I don't think you ever see anyone, I might have this wrong, but I don't think you ever see anyone kill somebody. Like when I go and kill young Ragnar, I tell people about it. And so there's an argument kind of that in the telling of it, I'm telling my own version. So what you're seeing is my version of how it went. And in the same way, Uhtred is telling the story, if you like, because he's the character we follow, of Iseult healing Edward, and he makes that connection and she makes that connection between his child then dying. Well, if they're unreliable narrators because they live in a world where magic is real, or where, you know, God and divine intervention or spiritual intervention really happens, then it can be real for them and real within the world of the show, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean it would be real in a kind of Neil deGrasse Tyson factual sense.
Yeah, because you actually start one of the big sort of spiritual missions in season 3 is when you kill Ragnar and you take his sword away from him so he can't get to Valhalla.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, I was really stoked with all that stuff because I didn't know that. I don't think that's in the book. It's not in the books, in fact. In the books, I think he kills quite a lot of characters off screen. You get someone saying, "Oh, Ragnar, he got old and he got kind of fat and happy and he died." Obviously, that doesn't kind of serve much dramatic purpose, and so I didn't know I was going to kill him until I killed him, and that was so exciting. Like, you get the script and you go, oh, holy shit. Like, I called Tobias, who plays Ragnar, and I was like, mate, have you seen what I do? But yeah, like that was such a fun arc. Sorry, my table's rattling. That was such a fun arc. You know, like I said at the beginning, like the culmination of everything that you kind of hoped you'd get to do, to take this character from a really ineffectual, kind of lazy and entitled and capricious kid to someone who I hope kind of moves somewhere through sympathy into empathy at points for the audience, and then turns out to be capable of like really, really dark and terrible things. And I think a thing that I always wanted to get, and I kind of, I don't know if I say fought for, because I didn't really have to fight anybody because everyone was it was very collaborative. But I was always really keen that he wasn't just a clown. And I was really worried about him being just a clown and just someone who you could dismiss. But I suppose the more you dismiss him, the more those moments of him acting impulsively and really firmly are all the more surprising. You know, I think with Ragnar and that killing, I hope, and certainly when I was reading it before we shot it, you think at any moment he's going to be foiled. You don't think he's going to go through with it. He couldn't possibly, because nothing we've seen has indicated that he could be capable of it. And that was what was exciting.
I flash back to when you were going to kill Alfred in season 1. When Guthrum had told you to go kill Alfred, and you were almost going to do it. You know, you pull the knife out, and then we don't really see what it is, but something in you tells you not to do it.
I thought that for me, I kind of made the decision that what that was the idea of being king is a very kind of glamorous thing. When you're sitting in Winchester, you're the most powerful kingdom in England. You're the wealthiest. And so in peacetime, particularly so in these earlier seasons, when he's further towards the beginning of his journey, you have this sense that, oh, you know, I'd love to be king, but I'd like to be a peacetime king. And I think there's something about when he climbs that hill and he looks at Alfred there and he sees this man with the weight of really the world, in the sense that they understood it, you know, weight of the world on his shoulders. who is at this crucial point where he is responsible for the life or death of his people and this kingdom. And I think it's a rare moment of humility where I think Æthelwold realizes he cannot bear that burden himself. And if he kills this man and then becomes king, there's still going to be a battle. There's still going to be bloodshed, and he's kind of not ready for it. And I think in that moment, he's like a volcano that goes dormant but not extinct. He sort of realizes that he can't do it now, and that he just has to kind of try and do the responsible thing. And actually, in season 2, so much of his frustration is he's been doing all the right things. He's not drinking so much anymore. He's not whoring, I don't think, or at least we made the decision that he kind of wasn't.
Right.
He's sitting on the Witten. He's trying to make decisions. He's being given important tasks to do. He's succeeding in all of them, and yet he's still not being rewarded. He's still not being recognized. There's still a new line of succession that is completely cutting him out of what, I'm sympathetic with him because I played him, but he is the rightful king. That
was going to be one of my questions for you.
Let's not forget this. He is literally the son of the king, and therefore it's perfectly legitimate. His claim. It's really
you fought in the Battle of Ethelden.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so glad you agree. Thank God.
No,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, you seem like you were turning into a real good guy, like you were saying in season 2. I mean, you even give Uhtred, I think, advice, like before the battle at Dunholm, about how he's the one that's going to help Alfred make England happen, and he sees it through the eyes of a king now. And it really seemed like you were going to be turning it around, being real good and proper. And then season 3, like you said, you start making some moves, though. You start making moves.
Yeah. And I think every time a new character comes in, you're kind of aware of the narrative function. This may be a kind of joyless way of thinking about it, but you are kind of aware of the narrative function that you play in a show like Last Kingdom. And when Hallig came in at the end of series 1, I was like, that's the nice version of me. So I won't be doing anything nice. And then and then he died, and you're like, oh, okay. And then when Osvith came in, you're like, that's the nice version of me. So you kind of become aware that there are these much nicer versions of Æthelwold getting really close to Uhtred, and you're like, I don't see my future being a nice guy and really close to Uhtred, because they've already got quite a few people doing that. But yeah, it was just such a fun show. I mean, it's really cool to hear you guys talking about it and how much you've kind of enjoyed it and connected with it, because it was just great. I mean, it was just great. It was the kind of thing that I would watch. I grew up on like Lord of the Rings and
us too.
Totally. And playing Age of Empires and strategy games, and I'm into Dungeons and Dragons, and this is so much the middle of my sphere of interest.
Awesome. So first of all, I noticed on your Instagram that we're Game of Thrones fans as well, and we did the same thing you did. We had a Deadpool during the Battle of Winterfell.
Yeah.
But that was the same weekend that Avengers Endgame came out, so we also added in an Avengers.
Oh,
so
nice.
Who we thought we were going to die in both. We had a Deadpool
favorite
for
character
both.
was going to get killed that weekend by either Thanos or the Night King.
I've completely missed the Marvel thing. Not out of desire to, but I feel like I've seen. I'm trying to think I've seen Ant-Man, but I think I've seen Ant-Man twice, weirdly. But other than that, and I've seen Deadpool. Is he Marvel? Is Deadpool Marvel? I should know this.
He wasn't part of the MCU before,
right? Okay.
Like Iron Man, Captain America, Thor. He wasn't one of them. But he is like a Marvel. It's all weird. It's all complicated stuff.
Yeah.
Should I start? They're worth doing, aren't they?
Yes.
Where should I start? Should I start at the beginning, or should I?
You should start with Iron Man. Yeah.
Okay.
And you can find lists online of the order to watch them. And actually, when I moved in the apartment, I hadn't seen them all. I'd seen Iron Man 1, I'd seen the first Avengers, but we sat down with the roommates. There were 4 of us. I think 3 of us sat down and watched them all the way through.
Oh wow!
And it was a lot of fun.
Heck yeah.
So yeah, we recommend it. Yeah,
it's terrific self-isolation activity, isn't it? If nothing else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Another thing too that we were thinking about too is, did you learn about Æthelwold while you were in school? Because you're from Britain,
Yeah.
and so Alfred Æthelwold, his lineage, was that something you already knew about, or?
We don't learn anything about it at school. We learn there's this one story which we see a version of in series 1, which is that Alfred went undercover to scope something. I can't really remember. And he goes to the house of a woman, and the woman says, don't let those cakes burn that she's making next to the fire. And he is thinking about his responsibilities as king, and he lets the cakes burn, and she has a go at him. I'm not really sure what the moral of the story is. I think it's kind of trying to teach us to be humble, but we're not really a nation whose history has been marked by humility. And that is kind of it. So we know who Alfred the Great is, but for example, Æthelfled, who is this phenomenal woman, an incredible figure in early English history, and a kind of proto female leader, even when women weren't really allowed to lead, and in our show, a warrior as well. And I've literally never heard of her. And so Æthelwold, I Wikipedia'd when I got the audition, and I found a quote that described him as the nearly man of early England. And I thought, well, that'll do then. That was about as much research as I did. The fortunate thing is that Bernard Cornwell, who writes the books, he does so much research.
Yeah.
And he is our window into the world and into the story. So I read all the books up to my demise, and thought about that a lot. But the Æthelwold in the books is so different. So when we're introduced to him, I think the description in the books is something like he was tall and broad, with hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes that caught the attention of serving girls. And I am 5'5" in big shoes. I refused to go to the gym ever in my life until season 2, where they kind of eventually dragged me there, and I was nearly sick. And my eyes have rarely caught the attention of anyone. So they kind of went off the beaten track with him. But no, I knew nothing about the guy, knew nothing about him at all, or about the story.
I think, they do such a good job of intertwining real historical events, at least what's been documented, what we know of, and the show. Obviously, a lot of the show is fictional, but I mean, in your circumstances, Æthelwold, apparently the real Æthelwold did, have a huge issue with Edward, becoming king after Alfred died. And the show probably doesn't embody it in the exact way it's documented, or been documented, but it does embody that, as you see Edward being groomed to be king. That's when we were just talking a minute ago about, you think you've been doing all the right things, and all of a sudden you're seeing, wow, I'm never going to get this. They're never going to give this to me. I need to start, making my own moves.
Yeah.
So the show does a great job of that.
I think it does, and I mean, our version of Æthelwold probably does him a little bit of a disservice. There were years after the death of Alfred where he'd gone north. He'd got a Danish army. He had real claim to being the most powerful man in England for a good couple of years. They've discovered coins that he had minted with his head on it. And he was raiding the borders of Wessex. He was making encroachments into the territory of Wessex. And then the battle that we see at the end of series 3, in the actual history, what happened was Æthelwold's armies won that battle. It was the great battle between Edward and Æthelwold's armies. And Æthelwold's armies won. Oh. But he was killed, and therefore his armies, which were predominantly mercenaries, just went, oh, well, that will just go home. And so had he lived, he probably would have been king, the legitimate king of England. He came very close.
From what I read, I mean, his claim was as strong as ever, and there were a lot of people who believed that he had a stronger claim than Edward.
Yeah. This was before, I think it's called primogeniture, which is where the eldest son inherits. We didn't, that wasn't in law in England at that point. So the function of the Witan was to decide on who should be the next king. And often that followed eldest son, but it didn't necessarily. So I suppose it was quite legitimate for Æthelwold to be passed over originally, because I think in real history he was like 5 years old or something.
Yeah, I think he was young, very young. Yeah.
Yeah, as you say. But then by the time Alfred comes to the throne and starts trying to almost bring into law a line of succession favoring his son, that was not something that was part of the political landscape then. So, Æthelwold kind of kicking off and saying, "Hang on a minute," was pretty legit.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're very connected to Æthelwold. What do you love about Æthelwold?
I think it's very hard not to play someone for 3 years and for that character is the most significant kind of work I've ever done. I've never played a character for so long. Also on a super basic level, like, we were able to buy a flat because of this show. Like, otherwise it kind of changed my life in every possible way, and I made some incredible friends on it. So I've got huge fondness for the show and for the character in terms of its association. And then I think on a personal level, I love his spark and his humor and his ability, which I wish I had, to be just battered constantly and continue to believe that everything is going to come up your way in the end. He has an incredible spirit. Yes. And he's tenacious and dogged and determined. And I also think and we kind of get these hints of it, but he's a clever guy. He's very capable of manipulating people. And I think when we see him trying to do it early on, he hasn't yet realized that he himself can be manipulated. And ultimately he is manipulated throughout the show, but he's capable of quite sophisticated thinking. And I mean, I think he's fascinating because, as I said at the very beginning, he occupies this kind of halfway house between an awful lot of different ideas and a lot of different tropes, and yet kind of is fluid in his ability. I was very lucky to play someone who stretched me so much and who gave me so many opportunities to try different stuff and to have fun. He's like every room that he's in, he's a little bit like someone's just kind of thrown a grenade into it, and you don't know kind of quite what he's going to do or who he's going to side with. And that was great.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Æthelwold knows everybody's point of view, and he knows what to say to anybody to get them on his side, or to, he just has that way.
100%. We did, me and David, who played Alfred, we never actually did it. We never printed them up, and I wish we had. I made him his for his rap party, rap present, but we did top trumps cards for all the characters on overseas. Do you have top trumps over in the US?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with this.
Top trumps is a kind of card game that we have over here where you take a category, so it could be like cars or frogs, and you kind of have 6 or 7 attributes, and they're all kind of marked out of 10 for those attributes, and then you kind of play to try and win each other's cards by beating the score in the nominated attribute. And so we did those for the characters. So I think we did, for each character, we had strength, sword skills, agility, intelligence, cunning, piety, hygiene, and libido categories. And we did them for every character in series 1, 2, and 3. We did separate ones, so baby Edward had a different card to grown-up Edward, and young Ethelfled had a different card to grown-up Ethelfled. And I think Æthelwold scored really high on cunning and pretty high on intelligence, agility, and libido. And the rest, I think he was pretty low. He had very high libido. Bless him.
I'm thinking of the first speech that he has when he's groveling. It's not his first grovel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you can tell this is not your first grovel.
Yeah. Yeah, that was it's a really strange thing when you do scenes like that, because obviously all the background artists are the extras, if you like, are Hungarian, and so a lot of them don't really speak very good English, and so they can't really tell what you're talking about, and so all those places where you think you're going to get a reaction, you kind of don't get a reaction. And they have, we had the brilliant assistant directors who were Hungarian, who would you'd see them holding the script and like explaining it to everybody in Hungarian, and then doing bits in English and going, "I love tits," and then they go, "Ha ha 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 ha," to encourage everybody to kind of laugh. And that was a really fun shoot day. It was really cold. The ground was frozen that day, so we had to have knee pads on, because once we came round the corner, the mud was rock solid. And we probably did it, I'm trying to think how many times I did it, maybe 12 times. And I thought there was only one, it was kind of the first big performative thing that I'd done on the show. And also it was like in front of the other cast members, who by this point I was still kind of getting to know. So I thought I'm going to be this could be really, really embarrassing. And I thought, well, the only thing I can really do is just properly go for it and leave it all on the field. Yeah. So I kind of went for it in rehearsals, and it kind of ended up coming out pretty good. And it was really fun. But we had that on that scene. We're being pelted at the beginning of the scene with food. And they'd given the extras almost like, I think, is it Cheetos? Like we have Wotsits, but like kind of like corn puffs to throw at us. Yeah. And they'd given them red cabbage leaves to throw. Okay. And so we were getting pelted with red cabbage leaves, and they were throwing mud at us, and they were throwing corn puffs. And I hadn't really worked with Alex, who plays Utrecht, that much by this point. He can be quite an intense guy. He said to me, like, we're too clean, like put mud on me. And I go, okay. And he starts grabbing these handfuls of mud and like rubbing them on my clothes and like on my foot. And I'm like, oh, okay, I mean, maybe we should kind of check with costume and make him. He's like, no. So he starts rubbing mud on me. So I kind of rubbed some mud on him. And it was only afterwards that I kind of smelt my hands, is that we had huge amounts of livestock on that set. And it was it was the shit of 1,000 animals that we'd rubbed all over one another. And so the scene had this kind of peculiar feel to it already. And then you factor in that all these people are throwing food at us, and they were throwing food at us, and they'd been given, as I say, light things to throw. And as part of the set dressing, there were these big baskets of apples, and some bright spark in the some of the kind of more industrious background artists decided that they were going to grab the apples and start throwing apples. Now, if you get hit by an apple, you really know you've been hit by an apple. And there was a bit that stayed in the show where this little kid, ran up behind us. And I kind of looked over my shoulder and saw him. And as hard as he could, he threw an apple, and it whacked Alex on the back of the head. And Alex turned around and went, "Ah!" and like shouted at him. And it stayed in the show.
Yeah, that wasn't what you're talking about.
Yeah, that wasn't scripted. When
he screamed at the crowd?
When he shouts, when Alex shouts, wasn't scripted, because he got whacked in the back of the head by this like 8-year-old.
It's like a genuine like rage moment, like when you stub your toe. It's just like,
He was furious. And Levente, the stunt coordinator, ran in at the end of the take. They called cut, and this stunt coordinator ran in. And I speak a little bit of Hungarian. I kind of picked a bit up while I was there. And he was the calmest man, Levente. I never saw him raise his voice. I never saw him get cross, apart from this one time where Alex had this apple lobbed at the back of his head, and he ran in, and I could hear him shouting in Hungarian. And the only bit I understood was him going, "Nem alma," which just means no apples. And it but kind of Alex
took out the star of the show.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Alex loves all that kind of stuff, though. I mean, like Alex is really Alex comes from like a school of working where like he really needs to feel it, and he really wants to kind of inhabit the character. So I mean, I don't think it annoyed him as him. He just kind of he used it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean that works well for that scene where he stands up after that thing and everyone's like, "Kiss the cross," and he looks so pissed off.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, he got a lump coming. No wonder he was pissed.
Yeah, that's an awesome story. That's an awesome story.
I did not know. Yeah, that's probably like the first time too, because that whole episode is probably one of our favorite episodes, and that's the first time Like we really fall in love with Æthelwold there is when he just comes up and his speech. Oh my God. It had us floored.
It's the same one with Ubba, isn't it? Is that the same?
Yeah,
it's the one where the Battle of Kane went with
where he leans, that shot where he leans forward. And when people talk to me, like, so obviously, you know, my mum and dad couldn't wait to tell everybody that I was doing TV and doing this show. And there's the scene that I have had the vast majority of their friends from church come up and tell me that well done for being on the show, but they didn't like that bit where that man's Achilles opened up.
Yeah. So we're physical therapists. So,
of course.
Bubba's functionality after that. Well, we're almost physical there. Not great, you know. Probably gonna need to, you know, get some kind of orthotics on that guy.
Yeah, I mean, what? Elevate it, bit of ice. Walk it off.
Yeah, exactly. You could be a PT. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, can Rune still walk after that? I mean,
yeah.
We assume that was real. I mean,
yeah, it was real. Yeah, it was very real. Because Rune was a semi-professional footballer. Rune played for a Norwegian, like, 3rd or 4th tier football team.
Yeah, we saw he played. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a crazy guy. He's a crazy guy, Rune.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like he is on the show. He'll turn up to things wearing the most amazing multicolored suits and just scream at all the cameras, and they'll be like, "Who's gonna come for a drink?" You know, okay.
It was
cool.
He was a character we were sad to see killed off so soon because he was hilarious on screen. I mean, what a personality that he was too. So
yeah, people loved him. I mean, it was great. It was right on the edge of just being so mad that he couldn't get away with it, but he got away with it. You know, like it was great. It was really great. I remember and the read through, he did that. Like he did it like that in the read through on day one. I mean, the balls to sit across from everybody with all the executives and the writer and just be like, oh, he really went for it. Yeah.
So speaking of deaths, you unfortunately died at the end of season 3. How are you feeling now? Season 4 is coming up here. How you been feeling?
Yeah, I mean, all right, not bad. I think, you know, it's a show that I love, and I'm so looking forward to seeing it. And it's a show that some of my best friends, you know, in the world are in that show, and I really want it to do really well. I think it's going to be a bit weird. I do think it's going to be a bit strange, sitting there being like, oh, wow, I used to be in that.
It'd be weird not seeing you on screen from our point of view too.
Yeah, you know, I hope so. I mean, I hope he made an impression.
Absolutely.
But no, I mean, it's going to be really cool. I think it's I don't know when it is, 26th, 27th of April, something like
26th
that.
26th here.
26th of April here, 26th.
Yeah. There we go. So not long to wait now. But I mean, I haven't seen any of it. I've heard a few rumors. But you know, all I can tell you is it's Uhtred's in it. Uhtred's in this season, which you'll all be pretty pleased.
Really?
You know? Yeah. They considered bringing me back and doing the whole thing from my point of view in kind of purgatory and like a sitcom, like a live audience sitcom, and they kind of bottled it. They decided to go with the whole horsey-sorty thing, and I can't really blame them.
Did you know you were gonna die that season, or how did that?
When did you find out?
I had a pretty good idea that I was going to die because we were following the pattern of doing 2 books a season, and Æthelwold dies in the end of book 6, and you kind of you do the maths and you go, okay, fine, end of season 3. But then there was a I don't want to tell you the other character that was involved in it because I don't know what happens in this season. But there was a situation where at one point they were thinking of keeping me and another character alive, and it would be that Uhtred was trying to choose, but he had the chance to kill one of us, and he wasn't sure which one he was going to kill. And they kind of toyed with the idea of leaving that as almost as a cliffhanger, so that I think I would have been in the beginning of season 4. But I think that was like a very early sketch. And as I say, while you're shooting it, the show's still fluid. So by the time we got halfway through the shoot, so about 3 months in, you know, my agent obviously wanted to know, and I wanted to know, and I think the rest of the cast were quite keen to know as well. And they were like, and you know, and I got the kind of like, yeah, you know, this is definitely gonna be it for him. But that was, you know, it was his time, I suppose, and he had a good run. He did far better than he deserved to, all things considered.
Yeah, that's true. He probably, I mean, Alfred probably should have listened to Uhtred and killed him right away when he became king, because it caused a lot of problems, the fact that he didn't.
100%. Yeah, it was a huge mistake. It was a huge mistake to leave him alone.
What are some of the biggest challenges playing Æthelwold?
I think that it was the thing I think I mentioned. I never wanted him to be just a clown. And I was always really aware of, like, you know, you mentioned, and I hadn't thought of it, but you kind of mentioned the scene where he says, "I see it as a king would see it," in season 2. And then I think quite often he would say these things, and then immediately afterwards someone has a line where they're like, "Don't talk shit," or they take the piss out of him. And I kind of I understood that was what, you know, the script, and the script has been gone through with a fine-tooth comb and really brilliantly crafted by very talented writers. So I'm not going to go in there and be like, we should cut that line, because actually it doesn't serve me very well. But I wanted to ensure that the hard thing was making sure that he didn't just become a clown, didn't become light relief. But, you know, I was just very fond of him. I just really enjoyed it. I don't think any particular part of it was any more. I mean, technically, the eye was the most challenging thing about the whole show. You know, it was the biggest impediment to being able to work, because, you know, just your eyes hurt.
How did they burn out the eye?
Yeah,
when they did that scene.
How was that done?
We had, I'm trying to remember. We had whenever you do those stabs, and essentially it's a stab, it's where a piece of the weapon goes into the body. You have so when I killed Ragnar, I had like a knife which had the handle and hilt and the cross guard, or whatever it's called, of a knife, with an old-fashioned radio aerial that kind of retracts into itself, and that was what you stab with. And so, you know, you can show that movement of the hand going in. So normally you use like 2 or 3 different versions of a weapon, and sometimes they've got a load of kind of green material over them so they can get trapped and then posted in. And I think we had a poker with some LEDs in it to flash red, and then I think we had one that was almost fully green screen. But there was a guy, so the guards were holding me down, were members of the stunt team, and we were about to do pretty much the first take of me having my eye put out, and I knew it was going to be quite a big day. One of the guards held me down, and he was this Hungarian guy, and I don't think I'd ever spoken to him before, and I don't actually think I ever spoke to this guy again. And he just looked at me and went, "Before it goes in your eye, it's going up my arsehole." And I went, "Okay." I went, "Oh, okay, cool. Cheers, guy."
So you were like really trying to score him off.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And then that, you know, and then you do. So obviously the smoke is all in post, and then, you know, they just had me scream for about half an hour.
There's like an ember, like it falls on your cheek. Is that like post production?
That's all post.
Yeah,
I mean, that's amazing. Like the stuff they do is
looks so real.
Yeah, and you have no sense of it when you're shooting it, particularly when you're the person that it's happening to. Like, you have no particular perception of whether it's going to be it's going, you know, you trust it'll look good, but you've got no perspective on it. You can't tell whether it's going to be a really successful thing or whether it's going to be kind of slightly underwhelming, and you're just consistently surprised by it. You know, we'll often see the first episode of something at a screening, or maybe the first 2 episodes. And in fact, I think unusually, for season 3, the screening was actually the last 2 episodes, because, you know, obviously they were losing Æthelwold, but more importantly, we were losing Alfred, and they decided to show those episodes for the cast and crew, because it was more of a, I don't know, it would more recognize the culmination of 3 years or 4 years work, really.
Yeah.
And that central tension, that's going to be the really fascinating thing that I'm so excited to see what they do with the kind of brilliant people who are going to step up and fulfill that role. You know, Tim Innes, who plays Edward, you know, what huge shoes he's got to fill. I'm sure he'll do it wonderfully. Because the central tension of that show is the relationship between Alfred and Uhtred, and that has to now be reinvented, and they have to find those new, his new adversary, not his adversary, they're kind of frenemies, aren't they? They're kind of they have this kind of
love hate
relationship, and
like you and Alfred were definitely those guys.
Yeah. I mean, David is like such an incredible actor, and I'd known him for years, and always wanted to work with him. And what was really lovely, which we only kind of discovered a little while in, was that we used to go and see each other in plays. So I saw him in a play when I was 18 or 19. Actually, he was in a play with Simon Kunz, who played Odder, the Elder, in Series 1 and Series 2. And I was like, oh my God, who's that guy? That guy's amazing. And then had seen him in lots of stuff. And he'd been and seen me in a few things. And so when I found out that he was on it, I was so stoked, because it was someone who I just respected and respect so much as an actor. I mean, I think he's a really, really incredible actor, David.
Yeah.
And he'll be hugely missed. Like, that dynamic will be, I'm sure it won't be missed to the kind of detriment of the show, in the sense it'll make the show worse. It'll just make the show different.
Yeah, and same thing with you not being on it. It's going to make the show different, because as well as Alfred played Alfred and David Dawson played Alfred was incredible, you were incredible as Æthelwold. I mean, you absolutely killed the role.
That whole dynamic, between, I should be king, what's going to happen. I mean, it was pretty crazy. So what were some of your favorite, scenes to shoot, whether it's for the character, something you got to experience? What was your favorite scenes from the show?
The first time I got to canter a horse was in episode 6, the Danes, real Danes shouting bit. That was
great.
Oh man, and that was so exciting, because we were only allowed to do what's called a sitting trot. So there's a way that the horse trots, which is counterintuitive to the way that you're bouncing up and down genitals first onto the horse. And they have invented something called the Rising Trot, where kind of as you kind of lift yourself up and out of the saddle. Now, they hadn't invented that in the year 880, whatever. So we just had to be slapping down on that saddle for hours at a time. It was incredibly uncomfortable. And
this was one of your favorite moments, right?
Yeah. It was such a disappointment when they wouldn't let me do it anymore. And so you do start to think like, oh my God, this horse is such a lump, and I'm such a lump, and this is just such an awful experience. And then for the first time, you canter. And when you canter on a horse, you are just suddenly aware that you have this thing is unbelievable. This animal is so powerful and so incredible, and you feel like you're surfing. Like, there's no effort in it on your part. You're just like, oh my God, this is so fast, and this is so cool, and this is so frightening. And in that same episode, there was a bit in where I've kind of snuck in to see. I listened to your roundup of the second part of Series 1, which is why all of these bits are in my head. But when I've snuck into Uhtred and Leia Fritch's group of Danes, and I run through the marshes with my hood up, and they were like, okay, hood up, sword in your sword belt, running through the marshes, and I was just thinking to myself, I am Aragorn. I am like, I'm the coolest guy. And then they came to me and they went, can you do like a comedy fall over into the water? I was like, oh, I'm Pippin. Okay, I'm Pippin then. So I've always remembered that scene really well. I also really like a story thing that we figured out, which is when we're all pretending to be Danes, we all have our hair done and we all have our tattoos painted on. And we realized that within the literally how it would have gone, Uhtred is the only person who knows how to do hair. So Uhtred would have had to have sat there and done 25 people's hair and painted 25 people's war paint, which really made us laugh.
They're just like sitting there between his legs, and he's just brave.
Yeah, exactly. Just asking people what they did for their holidays. But in terms of scenes that I really loved, there was a scene with Sigebrit and Beocca in season 3, which takes place in a chapel just after I've had my eye put out. And that, I remember really enjoying that scene. Anytime I got to work with Ian Hart, I really love.
He's incredible.
Ian is you just watch Ian do stuff. He's an amazing man. I really love Ian. And then what else did I really love? God, I'm trying to think. I had I'll tell you what, the scene where I get condemned to have my eye taken out.
Yeah.
It was one that
it's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, and there's one that I'd really worked at and really thought about, and I knew was really important for me to get right, and for everyone to get right. It doesn't live or die by what I do, but I knew that I was kind of a disproportionately large part of that scene compared to other ones.
I'll tell you what, the intricacies of that scene that you do definitely come out. Like, there's a part where someone mentions Ragnar's name, and you just see your Adam's apple like gulp, because they don't know at this point, they don't know that you've killed him,
No,
and then the part where Alfred gives you your sentence, and you have the belief, Alfred's like, you think you're gonna get off on this, and to see your face when he's like, that's what you've put in danger, and you're like, okay.
Yeah. It was
brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much. And it was like, even in what I really liked about that scene is it was a kind of little microcosm of everything that he'd been. So he was being deceitful, and he was kind of being funny, and he was kind of being charming, and he was being sophisticated, and he's afraid. And even in that point where Alfred goes out to consider his decision, he's going up to Sigebrit and still saying to Sigebrit, right, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do. And there was just so much in it, and everyone, it was a scene with all these wonderful actors and cast members, all of whom I could have looked at any moment and would have got something really kind of wonderful to play with and work off. And it felt like a little microcosm of really the whole show, of just being in a room with really talented people, everyone supporting each other and wanting it to go well. And yeah, it was a really good scene. It was a really good scene in the end.
It was a brilliant scene, and on everybody's end, Alfred and Æthelwold's interactions there were phenomenal.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's a real finale to their relationship.
Yeah.
Alfred and him. It's really cool.
Yeah. All good.
So besides Last Kingdom, though, we always talk about some other shows that we like. What are some things that you watch? What are some things that you really like to watch?
What am I watching at the moment? God, literally all that's coming into my head is Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I love to watch. We're on lockdown, so we're watching a lot of true stuff.
Like documentaries, or
documentaries like The Keepers.
I watch it. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. And The Staircase and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, The Staircase is one of my favorites.
Staircase, unbelievable. Really unbelievable.
Did you finish The Staircase?
Yeah.
Have you heard of the owl theory?
Yes. Yeah. What a fascinating.
What do you think of that?
I don't know, man. I mean, like, I'm not very. I believe whatever the last person told me. Right. So the owl theory is at the forefront of my mind. I'm like, yeah, you know what, that makes complete sense. And then I'm sure someone could sit down with me for 30 seconds and really calmly break down why that wouldn't make any sense. And I go, I don't know why anyone would think an owl.
Exactly.
But yeah, so what am I watching? We're watching that. We have a kind of what do I like in a more broad sense, like what I like to watch.
We know you said Lord of the Rings.
I mean, look, we back to back Lord of the Rings once a year in between Christmas and New Year. We normally spend half of Christmas with my family and half of Christmas with my partner's family. And we, as a day where we don't have any family, we turn our phones off, we order takeaway food, and we watch all the Lord of the Rings films back to back. And I saw Viggo Mortensen in Soho, who plays Aragorn, about 3 months ago, and I've only ever been up to two actors and said, I just want to tell you, I think you're amazing. Him and Stephen Graham, who I'm not sure if you guys will be familiar with. He played Al Capone in Boardwalk Empire, but he's done a lot of incredible indie films over here.
Okay.
And Viggo Mortensen was outside a donut shop. So I went up to him and sort of awkwardly shook his hand and told him how great I think he is. Because I could watch those films every day. I could watch them every day.
Okay.
And my favorite films are all the Lord of the Rings films and Moonlight, which is quite an unusual Venn diagram to be in the middle of. But there we are.
I watched Moonlight recently.
I think it's amazing. I think there's an actor in that called Trevante Rhodes who plays the third iteration of the lead character, and I think it's kind of probably the best performance I've ever seen. Like it's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. I know. We watched all of Thrones.
What do you think of season 8?
I mean, how could it ever make everyone happy?
True. So were you happy?
I was. I loved some of it. Some of it wasn't my ideal version of what would have happened, but my ideal version of what would have happened would have alienated many more millions, I think, probably than other people's. And I think that, the thing that I really think about that show is we've had a little taste in The Last Kingdom. Those of us for whom it was a really big deal and continues to be a really big deal. We've had a little taste of how it feels to be in a show that people like. I can't imagine what it's like for those, Emilia Clarke and Kit Harington and Alfie Allen and Maisie Williams, who've been in that show from the beginning, who no one really knew who they were or knew who they were at all, to suddenly become the biggest stars in the world, and then for that to finish. I can't imagine how hard that is. As a bit of a cop-out answer, what did I think of the show? Well, I think about the people who were in it, but there was some, the Battle of Winterfell was one of the best hours of. I mean, the best thing I think they ever did in that show was the Battle of the Bastards.
Yes,
and I think that was the when Jon Snow is kind of suffocating under the bodies is one of the most panic-inducing and affecting things I've ever seen.
I was home freaking out. I was like,
yeah, and they captured that, and as we're so used by now to seeing, a scene where character A goes through extras 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 and goes slash slash slash, and those things are really impressive. But when we get shown something different, and you get shown something you've never seen before, and I'd never really seen a representation of what it must be like to die under the weight of all those bodies. It just blew my mind that they did that, and everyone involved in that. It was incredible. It was incredible.
I tell all people who I talk Game of Thrones with, I'm like, listen, you like Game of Thrones, you gotta watch Last Kingdom, because in Game of Thrones you gotta wait 2 or 3 episodes for something big to happen. There's build. Last Kingdom, you're gonna get 2 or 3 every episode, and it doesn't feel rushed somehow.
Oh, good. I mean, that
doesn't. It flows so well.
When you look at the books, I mean, there's so much in there, and you kind of go. I mean, obviously, as an actor, you're like, well, if we did one book a series, that would be much better, because it meant I would have been in it for 6 years. But you do kind of hope that it doesn't feel rushed, and that I think because you're jumping around and seeing so many, you're following Uhtred, and you're following Alfred, and you're following, Breda and Ragnar Ragnarsson, or you're following kind of whichever other, whether it's Heston or Knut or Bloodhair or I always want to call him Siegfried and Roy, which is terrible. Siegfried,
Eric and Siegfried.
You're with them. You're seeing all these people's lives unfold and stories unfold, and then they kind of come together for these huge moments. But I'm glad it holds. Really glad it holds.
Very, very well. Absolutely. So one other question I got for you here.
Sure.
How many tables did you guys go through in the scene where Beocca comes in and just slams that axe down?
Oh, man. Well, I think we were quite a few, in the sense that he had a very specific point that he had to hit.
Okay.
He didn't always hit it. And I think we had one of those moments where you hit one end and the other end goes once or twice. That was quite a hard scene, because also I've got no peripheral vision. So they had to sit me somewhere where I could see him coming, because otherwise I couldn't get my hands off the table in time. But that was just the perfect example of you just watch it in, and I'm kind of, Ian was kind of the only. I felt super guilty for all the tourist stuff. It felt guilty in a way because of the impact it had on Beocca, and Ian's such a wonderful actor that's so clear in everything he did. That was a sort of disproportionately difficult scene. Not, as I say, it's no great torment compared to the vast majority of things that happen. But yeah, that was kind of an upsetting scene because he gave such an amazing performance, and that was all my fault.
It was great. It was great though. I mean, just really surprising. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's been great to have you on though. We won't keep you that much longer, but before you go,
you giving us your time.
Yeah, appreciate the time. But before you go though, what else? I know we're on lockdown right now and everything, but do you have any other projects lined up? We know you're in plays and things like that.
Yeah, not at the moment. There was a little something that I don't think I can talk about, which was meant to be. I should have shot by now, but we got put into lockdown. Yeah, that's it for now. I'm running 2 Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, so
There you go.
What are some of
my time?
What are some of your biggest goals?
I mean, I would love to be in the Amazon are doing that Lord of the Rings.
The new series they're coming out with.
I'd just love to be in that. I did, I auditioned for The Hobbit years and years and years ago.
Oh yeah.
They cast the net very wide with projects like that, and I was 19, so it was 11 years ago. And I went up for a small part in The Hobbit, and obviously didn't get it. But anything from that Tolkien universe, from that lore, and I think as I kind of do it for longer and longer, working in this industry and getting to do stuff is such a gift, and there are so many people who want to do it, and there is so much time that you spend as an actor when you're not working, and thinking about what you do, and wouldn't it be great if I could have been in that, and I just love the work, and if you can be in things that people connect with and people care about, then kind of that's all that matters, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Do you have anything else, Steve?
No, I think that's about it then. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to take any more of your time today. We really appreciate the time you've given us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So again, we are Colby and Steve from the Screen Chronicles. We're joined today by Harry McEntire, who's generous enough to give us his time. So you know where you can find us on YouTube, on Instagram, and Facebook, at the Screen Chronicles _ on Instagram, and the Screen Chronicles on YouTube and Facebook. And you can find us on almost any podcast app. And we look forward to talking to you guys soon.
Yeah. Thanks. Whenever you want to come back too, come on back.
Absolutely. Love to have you.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.